and thank you so much for tuning in to the She Can Ball podcast. I'm your host, Mahi Jariwala. Today we're joined by journalist, sports broadcaster, and podcast host, Cari Champion. Thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. And I can tell you already, I'm so impressed. I think I need a new job because I don't even know if I'm a podcaster anymore. We're watching you. You've got it down already.
Thank you. So how are you? How's your quarantine been?
My quarantine's been really good, actually. 2020 has been, I think, professionally a great year for me. Personally, it's been sad because I think that we are all in a space where we're seeing the world for what it is. And my blinders, if you will, have been lifted, but that's okay because I think it, as a journalist, has made me more dedicated to the craft and made me more focused on what I believe my mission is in this world in terms of what I want to contribute to society as a journalist.
That's awesome. I think we all look at this year like, oh, it sucks. We've been at home all day, but that's awesome that you're kind of able to look on the bright side of it. So I want to begin this interview talking about you and your journey and how you got to where you are today. So let's start from the beginning. Where did you grow up and how did you end up studying at UCLA?
I grew up here in Los Angeles, where I'm at currently. I grew up specifically in West LA, and then my mother got a really good job. It was just me and my mom in the household, and a good job for her allowed us to move to Pasadena, which is about 20 minutes outside of the city. And that pretty much changed my trajectory in terms of what I wanted to do and how I wanted to live my life. And when I lived in Pasadena, I was able to thrive in a different way. I had a different school system. I was able to really hone in on what I loved as a kid that ultimately fed my desires to be a journalist. I always knew that I wanted to do this from the age of 7, but living in Pasadena, a bit of a smaller community at the time, gave me so many more options and so many more yeses, as opposed to living in the inner city, which was great, but I felt like I was able to really pursue what I wanted to do with a lot of encouragement based on just my environment and the people around me and schools that I went to. So I then had a few options when I graduated from college. In my mind, I wanted to leave to go to Michigan State because Magic Johnson went there, and I'm a diehard fan. Yeah. So I applied to Michigan State, and I got in, and my mother was like, "No, it's too cold, and I want you home with me." So I didn't get the opportunity to go there. And honestly, if I really wanted to press the issue, I'm sure she would have allowed me to. Yeah. But I just ended up going to UCLA. It ended up being perfect. I had a choice between UC Berkeley and UCLA. And it seemed easier, more convenient. I was the first in my family to go to school, so the process was also new to me, but I wouldn't change it for a thing. When I got to UCLA, I met, obviously, some colleges where you'll meet your lifelong friends and you really get to formulate your spirit and who you are. And it really turns out that you pretty much are the person, I think, honestly, that you will ultimately be, because the world is so open. You learn so much. You're like a sponge. You're taking so many different classes. You're meeting so many different people. Yeah. You live on campus, and it was just a world in itself, and it was so amazing. And I wouldn't change that experience for anything in the world.
That's awesome. And I want to go back because you said at age 7 that you wanted to become a journalist. How did that kind of pop up in your head? I think a lot of 7-year-olds aren't thinking that way. Was it someone that you saw on TV, or what really sparked?
Yeah, you have to see the representation, which is why, as I'm wearing my shirt, Brown Girl's Dream,
yes,
you have to see the representation. You have to see yourself in order to believe it. And I'm for all brown girls, right? That's inclusive of all those who are marginalized, who don't get a fair shot. That would be you, that would be me, that would be my sisters, it'd be anybody. And when I was a little girl, I rarely saw images that looked like me. But one of the images that I saw that really stood out, and that was because clearly she was special, was Oprah Winfrey. And I saw her on the TV screen, and I just stopped. I remember it like it was yesterday, and I told my mom, I want to watch this show. I had no idea what it was. I'm 7 years old, but I felt like this woman was familiar and very familial, for that matter, in terms of it felt like family. And she just had something. And ever since I was a kid, I felt that. I felt like I was called to do something. I always felt set apart in environments. I felt set apart in school. I felt set apart, not in a bad way, but in a way that required me to have a responsibility to do more and help and speak out. And while I didn't know what any of that looked like, it was just always a part of my spirit. It was always a part of who I was. And when I saw this woman doing all the things that I wanted to do, I was like, that's what this feeling is. It's embodied in this woman who has her own show named Oprah Winfrey. And that was always the North Star for me, meaning that was always what I wanted to do. And I never ever walked away from that. There was a time though, because it's very similar. Journalism is very similar to being a lawyer, which, there's a lot of speaking up and standing up for people,
Yeah.
giving voice to those who don't have a voice. There was a time where I thought, well, if I don't really do this, I will pursue that. But I was really called to be a journalist. I was really called to have a platform for those who needed a voice.
That's amazing. And you're doing that right now for women. I remember I was watching you on ESPN, and it's amazing to even see a female on there, because we think about sports and we think about, all right, NBA, MLB, whatever it be, it's always for men. And it was always like, all right, this is what guys do, but you're out there supporting and you're kind of representing the female community out there. So how did you end up on ESPN?
So like I said, when I started off as a local journalist. So when I left UCLA, I drove across country to West Virginia. That was my very first job. I was a one-man band, which is very popular. Nowadays they call it MMJ, and in many cases you're a podcaster from home. But I carried my own camera, my tripod. I drove to every one of my stories. I took a camera, I shot, I went back into studio, I edited, and then I presented. So I was a one-man band. I shot, I edited. I then would present the story in studio. I did it all. And that's a very popular job now, but back in the day it wasn't. And I did that for about 6 months and I loved it. I thought that it was the best experience for me in terms of becoming a true journalist and learning how to tell stories and to write, because it's very key. If you want to be a journalist, you have to know how to write, and you have to be able to connect with people and distinguish truth from fiction, and really, really trust your own judgment as a journalist when you're out there in the field. And I stayed there for about a year, came back to LA. I worked what we call the assignment desk, which was about behind the scenes. I took a few jobs behind the scenes, but still in that same family of news. And then I got what I like to call my first real job, which was in Florida. I was in West Palm Beach, Florida. It was a pretty decent sized market, but that's where I learned everything. I learned to write. I learned to go live, talk in front of an audience live without any paper in front of me, and just figure it out and just have a conversation like we're doing right now without being consumed with a television camera in front of me.
Yeah.
I learned the importance of connecting with the community, and I learned how valuable media was and how powerful it was, quite frankly. And that was it for me. I just knew this was it. This is what I would do. I was breathing and eating, and it all felt right. Everything felt right. It felt like I had been, as I thought, since I was a kid at 7 years old. Here I am now, working in West Palm Beach, Florida, my first real job. I have my own cameraman, and we're chasing down stories and, talking to the mayor and covering every single thing. It's called a general assignment reporter.
Okay.
And it just made sense. But I knew that after a few bumps and bruises, ups and downs, everyone's career should have some ups and downs. Like, you have to have some failures in order to succeed. And I've had a few. And after one really big failure, in my opinion, at the time, I got fired from a job and rehired like in a matter of months. But I felt as if my reputation was soiled. And so from that moment on, I was like, I need to redirect. I need to pivot, if you will, in terms of my brand and what I want to do. And then brand wasn't a word. I knew that I had to approach journalism differently or in a different space. And that's when I started to focus on sports mainly. I made that my beat. I made that the only thing I really loved. And I love sports. I love basketball. Basketball is my favorite sport. I attempted to play. I never could do well. I ended up taking stats for my high school team because I was so bad. I ran track. I've always had an athletic build, but I wasn't great. They always say those who are great always end up teaching as opposed to doing. So
Yeah.
I had covered the sport really carefully, and I thought to myself, I'll just cover sports. And it wasn't even that I covered basketball. I started working at the tennis channel, and it was funny because I was like, okay, this isn't basketball, but it's still sports, and I have my foot in the door, if you will, in terms of changing the trajectory of the type of reporting I would be doing. And then a couple of years later, after, again, a lot of hard work and knocking on doors and taking many no's, I flew myself out to Bristol, Connecticut, which is where ESPN is headquartered. And I said, hey, I'd like to meet with someone. And I want to show them my tape, my resume reel, all the body of my work that I have built up over the years as a reporter and working at Tennis Channel and a few other odd end jobs on air.
So did you just like go there or like?
Yeah, I knew one person there, and I said, and he finally said, yeah, I'll take 10 minutes to meet with you. I'll never forget. His name was Jariwala. He doesn't work there anymore, but he was like, I'll take 10 minutes to meet with you. But little did he know I was flying across country for him to meet with me for 10 minutes. And then when I got there, he met with me and he's like, no, where are you from again? I said, LA. He was like, you flew here from LA? I was like, yeah. He was like, let me see if I can find anybody else to meet with you. And that's pretty much all she wrote. After that moment, he appreciated, just my hard work and my passion for it. And he called me, a year and some change later. Now, mind you, a year and some change after I flew myself out there. I think it was like a year. And I had always stayed in touch with him. I would send him just updated resume reels to show him my work. As if I was a basketball player, I would send him my latest game. You know what I mean? My latest film. He's like, take a look. And he said, okay, we'll come in for an interview. First Take is looking for a host. I don't know if you'd be interested, but I think you'd be great. And that was it. Voila. I interviewed, and I mean, between you and I felt I really, again, like, you'll have these moments for everyone who's listening to this podcast or paying attention to whatever happens in their life. If you're really self-aware, you will have moments. You're like, this is for me. This is meant to be. This is mine. I have been called to do this. It feels right. Yeah. And you visualize it and you manifest it. So I did this audition, and I was like, oh, I remember getting on the plane, flying back home. This time they paid, not me. And I said, I have the job, unless they want to hire a white woman, but I have the job. And at the time, there were very few brown faces that were women on air. They had former athletes, but women who were brown faces who looked like me, there was just uncommon. And so I thought that perhaps it'd go to a blonde, because that's a traditional hire. And that's not a disrespect. It's just what they felt was more comfortable for the viewer.
Yeah.
And I got a call probably 2 weeks later, and they were like, let's bring you back in for another audition. And again, I just felt it. I was just like, I can guarantee no one felt as comfortable as I felt in that moment next to these two big giant personalities in the name of Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith. I felt it. And I was comfortable because I went in no attachment. I went in believing that I could. So I did.
Yeah, and like listening to that, that's incredible. Using the word comfortable, I mean, that's amazing. Flying over there, going over there, not really even having someone say, oh, come, like, we want you, you going by yourself. That can be so scary. And even your job right now, even on ESPN, it's such a high pressure job, just like taking the last shot in a game. And so how do you kind of learn to handle your nerves?
Gosh, well, that's a good question. I don't have nerves anymore. I think when I first started in the business, I had nerves. I think when I first started at ESPN, which was in October of 2012, I was nervous because I wasn't prepared. Like, I wasn't as prepared as I thought I was. And so I was really nervous. But this goes for any job. If you play basketball, if you are a baller in any form or fashion, if you're prepared, if you've done the work, if you've been in the gym, if you've studied the playbook, if you've worked hard, if you've done all the things that you need to do, game day, you're going to be ready. It's not going to be nervous. It might be anxious. Like, you might want to just get it off, like get out there quick and just like shake it off. Or for me, I get a little anxious just before my producers in my ear, like, coming on in 5, 4, when you hit 1 and that red light comes on, you just got to be ready to go.
Yeah.
That's live TV. So you'll feel a little anxious, but I always feel prepared. And when I don't feel prepared, I'm nervous. But that's very rare for me because I am one of preparation. Like, I'm sure you prepared for this interview. You probably looked me up. You probably know that I worked at ESPN from this time to this time. You probably know that I have my own podcast, or all the different things that whoever your subject is that you're interviewing, you want to make sure that you've prepared yourself to the best of your ability. Much like how I said to you, I was like, so tell me more about this. Tell me now. Okay, now I have an understanding. I was like, okay, let me look it up. And I may not be as prepared as you are, but I have an understanding of the audience and what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's so true. And you know, being on ESPN, like you said, there weren't a lot of people looking like you. And so I think especially when you are different in that situation, people always like to say things. And especially being a female, I think people, if there's a mistake made, right? It's like, all right, bring in a male. You know what I'm saying? Just in life. And so did you always feel that? Did you ever feel that pressure?
Oh my God, did I feel the pressure? I was like, the advent of social media was right at the beginning of me being at ESPN. Like Twitter was at its all-time high. So not only did I feel that pressure, every Tom, Joe, and Mr. Smith had felt the need to tell me that I sucked. So I knew where I stood with the audience. Like if I made a mistake, they'd be like, okay, let me tell. Every single word that came out of my mouth, they let me know without fail that I was awful. And it was a very tough learning curve. You had to sink or swim, and I clearly swam, but I felt that pressure. I think that affected me greatly my first couple of years there. I think that my self-esteem was really low. I felt like, can I do this? Or every time that I wanted to jump out on a ledge and have an opinion and say something, I felt like I couldn't because I wasn't one of the guys, or my voice would not be respected like one of the guys. And once my nerves settled and I was more prepared, as mentioned, I think I started to discover my voice and my place in a world that was male dominated.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I just from watching, I mean, it's hard and like we go through these things where we still and we're in a world now where it's like female empowerment and people say that, but it's like it doesn't always happen. And it's so hard, especially being in that position where people are constantly critiquing you. I mean, I've gotten critiqued in my life and I'm very sensitive. So when people tell me stuff, I was listening to your podcast with Draymond Green, and when he was talking about how he went to Michigan State and he wanted to prove people wrong by going because, and I think it just, everyone has like a different mindset towards it. But like, how do you think you got that mindset to just say, all right, I'm just going to keep doing it?
Oh, I think it's repetition. I think by the way, I always look at people like you who, and I have my own organization. It's called Brown Girls Dream, and I mentor young girls, especially of color, because I want them to know that there's a place for them in front of the camera, behind the scenes, whatever they want to do in whatever field that they are in. I want them to feel like there's someone there who will allow them to take a shortcut, if you will, if they do the work. I'm a big believer in making sure people who look like us have an opportunity to get to the front of the line, just like others do for theirs. I want to make sure that we're protected as well and not overlooked. So what happens is that the reason that you end up being comfortable with all the rejection and the no's is that you'll get that one yes, and that one yes or those few yeses will empower you. And my one yes at the time at ESPN was that guy, Jerry Madelon, I told you about, who felt like I could do the job. And while everyone thought no, he said yes. And in my spirit, that one yes continued to remind me that I belong. I think there's always one or two people who will believe in you and fill you up, and you should cling on to them as much as you possibly can whenever you get an opportunity to be around them. The world will always tell you no. People will always say you're not good enough. And the beauty of what's happening with you, I think, at such a young age, in my opinion, you, by the time that you get to college, this won't even affect you. Like it will affect you in the way that it'll be new circumstances and new challenges. That's never the case.
Yeah.
You will be able to, whatever you choose to ultimately do, just fight through it. That's what any real champion does. That's what any true athlete does. Tom Brady says that he has amnesia. So if he forgets that it's not third down, it's fourth down, and you don't have another opportunity, he has to forget that play next Sunday. He has to forget that play next Tuesday when he goes back to the work.
Yeah.
So the real greats in any aspect, athletes specifically, have to have amnesia. I can't tell you how many times we've seen someone have a brain fart on the court. I can think of times when I was like, LeBron, why'd you do that? Or Kobe, may he rest in peace, would make these mistakes when he first started with the Lakers. You're like, why are you shooting the ball again? No. And he was like, you got to have amnesia and you have to believe in yourself. Sometimes, quite frankly, you got to shoot through it. And that's the same mentality. Like, I just have to shoot through it. I have to play through it. I have to tweet through it. I got to work through it. I have to interview my way through it. And eventually you'll hit your sweet spot. But the reality is that you're not always going to feel confident. No one is, if they're honest. And to me, honesty is where the real power is, because if I'm sitting here pretending to be great or pretending that I'm not uncomfortable or a bit insecure, I'm not being my true self. And when I'm not my true self, I'm not being the best that I can be as a reporter, as a woman on air, as a Black woman who's trying to have a platform for other Black women to feel free. The reality is that you have to, you in every single form, have to really truly try to be yourself and not let all those secrets hold you down, because it will stop you from being the best.
Yeah. And by the looks of it, it looks like you were very mature from a young age and you understood and you've learned so much. So is there someone that has kind of helped you through this, or someone that's kind of helped you with this mindset? Because that's amazing, and for you to have that figured out, especially kind of even going back when in your younger years doing all that stuff, that's amazing. And you think about, I mean, you compare that to someone else, I mean, a lot of people won't be able to relate to that. So what do you think, was there someone that kind of helped you with that?
Yeah, it was probably my upbringing. I think everyone's upbringing dictates how they can handle social situations. Like I told you before, I grew up with just my mother, and my dad wasn't in the picture till later in my life. And my mother made everything look really easy, which I'm sure it wasn't, but she made it look really easy. And I would always say, Mom, I want to do this, I want to do that, I want to explore this, or can I explore that? I want to run for class president. Sure. I want to be able to bake cookies for everyone in class. Sure, let's try that. Everything was yes. I lived in a world of endless possibilities when my mother was around. And as an example, all I remember as a kid was that she always worked very hard. She always had a job. She was home, but she just worked hard. She had a very hard work ethic. She'd come home, she'd be on the phone working, or I could hear her talking on the phone about what she should be doing next, or it was the visuals around me growing up. And I had so many examples of strong women who were relentless in their desire to work hard and to be providers, because they didn't really have a choice. At the time, I didn't know that was the case, but we were always fine. My mother was like, we'll always figure it out. It will always be okay. And when you grow up around that, you don't know that it's not going to be okay. And you don't know that it's not going to work out for you. And while that may not be the case all the time, right? Because life, then you wake up and you have life, right? And life hits you hard. You're like, and I'm all like, wait, I thought everything would work out. This sucks. This is not working out. But I think my mother, I think that I always say to anyone, make sure you look for a mentor. And when you have a mentor, someone you can talk to, ask them very specific questions. The same way that you're interviewing me and you're on the court and you're talking to somebody, whoever your mentor is in whatever field that you adore, if you want to be, in women's basketball, you want to be a coach, if you want to go to the WNBA, if you can get a mentor in whatever field that you think you want to be in, or even just a mentor who's very level, who you can connect with and understand, I would ask all these questions. I'd be like, so what about this? How is it difficult? How did you push through? And essentially your podcast can be that. I have a podcast for mentor. When you're interviewing people, you're asking the right questions, and you're doing the service that I think I like to do with my podcast, which is give lessons to everyone, so that they know that you're not alone and that ultimately you can figure this out. It may not always work out your way, but here are some tips. And my mom definitely was one of those just very strong, relentless women who really gave me what I like to call my intestinal fortitude, which is my gut strength, which allows me to speak up in a room, and it allows me to say, excuse me, I'm this might be uncomfortable, but you're about to hear my opinion. And that doesn't happen overnight, by the way. Like I want to say I just stepped into that power within the last 5 years, but it happens, and you build to it. Everything's a journey. Yeah,
that's so true. And with these interviews, I go in and I'm thinking like, I want to make these questions better for my audience, but then I also kind of come in and I'm saying I get an opportunity to talk to these amazing people. Not everyone gets to go, after school on Friday and say, oh, I'm talking to Cari Champion, guys, what are you doing? And so using this opportunity and learning from people, and that's essentially what people want to hear. So tell me a little bit more about your podcast.
Well, okay, so I have, it's so funny because I think now with the quarantine, everybody has 13 jobs. I feel like everyone's working so much, but I have a podcast called The BrownPrint, very much like the Brown Girl's Dream. And the BrownPrint is essentially a blueprint for those who are marginalized. The BrownPrint is for the guy or the girl who has continuously been doubted or told no, or perhaps not necessarily the number one overall pick like a Draymond Green, but you use that as a chip on your shoulder to prove everyone wrong. And Draymond went from, a late draft pick to someone who ended up being a major player in the league and a 3-time world champion. And there was a motivation for that. But his path wasn't like LeBron's. He wasn't crowned the king at, a teenage years and on the cover of Sports Illustrated. He didn't have the world essentially handed to him in a way that LeBron did. Now, mind you, LeBron had to work hard too, and he has his own BrownPrint, but there are those people who are the surprises, the ahas, if you will. So I've had Draymond Green on talking about how he chose Michigan State for those reasons, or how he was treated when he was on the team, or how people were really kind of nitpicking him when he started to make his way in the league and they didn't like him. And he had to assert himself and create a persona that said, listen, I'm the boss, whether you want me to be the boss or not. So he did it very differently, and that's the BrownPrint. The blueprint isn't made for people that look like me. The blueprint is probably made for those who have really good connections in an industry that is really hard to get into. I had no connections in the sports industry. I had no connections at ESPN. It's like you had no connection to me. You just were persistent and called, So the BrownPrint is for those people who use their persistence to create their own way. And so that is Misty Copeland. Like, she's amazing. She's the very first African-American prima ballerina. Like, that's just crazy within her company. And it happened in, 2016, 13, 14, I can't remember. But Misty, how were you able to take your love for being a Black woman into a world that is so white? And she was like, easy, this is what I did. But it's a BrownPrint. It wasn't easy. It was hard. And she started, and she came to dancing late in life. It wasn't the traditional way, which would be a blueprint. And so this podcast is really for those who like to achieve greatness in a non-traditional way.
Yeah. And, you had a great point there. I think we look at certain people, right? And we say, oh, wow, so they just went up and up and up. But there's some people that go down and up and up and down. And I think even with me, something I'm realizing now is, you go down and then we expect it. All right, so now it's just going to go up, right? Because we already went down once. So that's how it's supposed to work. But no.
That's not how it works.
Exactly. That's what I thought. And so all right, so once I get over this, it's going to be over. And this is what happened with my podcast. I had one episode where it didn't fully convert. And so I was like, all right, you know what? I got over it. Nothing bad's going to happen again. And things happen.
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And the testimony is in the way that you rebound, literally and figuratively, right? How you get that ball back and get back on defense, right? Like, what do you do to figure it out?
No, but I think sharing people's stories is so powerful. I think for me, I watched Steph Curry. It was actually a funny story because I remember watching, thinking NBA. I thought it was so overrated. I was in 3rd grade. Dad went to University of Michigan, so we were big Michigan fans. I'd watch college basketball. And so everyone in my school would be like, oh my God, did you guys see the Warrior game? And I was like, no, I don't watch that. I just watch college basketball, guys. You guys should too. And I started watching it one day and I'm looking at Steph Curry. I'm like, how does he do that? I was like, that's incredible. Mm-hmm. And I was the last seat on my CYO B team. So mm-hmm. I was like, that's so cool. Mm-hmm. And I watched something about his story and how he was under recruited in college. And so I was like, oh my God, that's me. I'm not good. I suck too. That means if I work hard, I'm going to be like Steph Curry. And that's what's brought me so far in basketball. And I think people's stories is so, so powerful.
Yeah, his story's great. It's a BrownPrint for me. It's he got passed by. His dad, who was already in the league, called around, asked for favors. Nobody wanted to really take him because they just didn't understand. He was too short. He, fragile. He wasn't strong enough. They're first, the Golden State, when they put that team together, kudos to whoever put the team together in terms of really put the team together, because those stories are urban legends sometimes. But they had these great group of guys. And I remember Mark Jackson saying, I remember interviewing Steph Curry in All-Star 2013. And he wasn't even an All-Star. He was participating in a 3-point contest. And he had just came down to New Orleans to be in the 3-point contest. And Mark Jackson was on our show and he was like, it's a shame that he's not even an all-star, he or Clay, because they're the best backcourt ever. There's no backcourt better. And it was before anyone really, much like yourself, thought they were much of anything, Steph specifically. And he was just there to be a part of the 3-point contest. He was not even an all-star. And I thought to myself, this is a beautiful story to watch now, to see how the trajectory and how his career has changed. And his setback could be, as could Clay's, would be this year. They've made it to the finals. They made it to the finals. Kevin Durant goes down. Steph is no good. The following year, Clay goes down during the finals as well. And it's like, that's a setback. It's hard to tell 3-time champions that they're not going to win against Toronto when Toronto just had one guy, but they were a hobbled team. Like, for them mentally, that had to be a setback. They fully went into the season thinking, especially that Kevin Durant will get healthy. They went into that season thinking they were going to win, I'm sure. There's just no way they thought, we don't get another chip. Like, there's no way. So though your whole point of understanding that life is, yes, you ascend, but there are setbacks. And you can look at any athlete and they can tell you, if you want to use the athlete analogy, of all the success, there's always setbacks. But to me, every setback is a setup for success. Like, it literally is. The setback teaches you more than any bit of success can teach you.
Wow, it's a short saying, but it means a lot, and that's true. And I think you learn so much as we don't like to say that. And I think I don't like that because I hate making mistakes. It's annoying. But you learn so much more, like you said, than if you learn so much more from a 60 than if you got 100%, right?
100%. I hate the failures. I hate the tough times, but man, the lessons are invaluable.
True. And, talking about interviewing players, you've interviewed some exceptional basketball players, Kobe Bryant, Candace Parker, and so many more. And so what do you think separates them and the greats from the other professional basketball players? Is it their mindset, physicality, or is it something else?
It's always mindset. I think the skill set is always there, but the mindset is what really takes you over the next level. If you really have a clear, like, Candace is the ultimate competitor. She's like a Tom Brady in the sense that, there are these funny stories about how Tom Brady, how you can't play anything with him because he takes it serious like it's a Super Bowl. Like, dude, you were just playing ping pong and he thought it was the Super Bowl. And it's like, dude, he gets so mad, right? That's Candace. Like, she is a competitor at anything. You're playing spades, you're playing anything, like handball, like, she's a competitor. But that's that mindset, and you can't turn it off. And I respect it. And the same with Kobe. He was just always a competitor. I think, he was often misunderstood while he played. And I kind of have this same mentality in what I do for a living. Mm-hmm. If I end up making friends, I think that's beautiful. But I really go in to do a job. Friends are always bonus, meaning I don't go in mean, and I don't go in like I don't want to make friends. I do love, and I love to be around people, and I love to have a good time. Yeah. But while I'm working, it's time for work. Like, it's time to get to work. And there's time for play, but then there's time to work. And when I'm in live television mode, or when I'm in production mode, or I'm in creative mode, I'm in mode. Like, I'm zoned in. I need to be locked in so that I can do my best. To my detriment sometimes, right? But the reality is that that's just the mindset of someone who wants to be great. And that was Kobe's mindset. He wanted to be great. There's a story, there's a podcast, I don't know if you've listened to it, called All the Smoke. And
I have, yeah.
Kevin Garnett tells a story about how he wanted to, when he was in between teams, he called Kobe and he was like, Kobe, let's link. I want to come to the Lakers. I think me and you would be great together. And it was right after Shaq left. And Kobe had all these rumors around him about whether or not he could be great without Shaq. There were people who doubted him and thought that Shaq was the real prize, because Shaq had left and went to Miami and won a chip. And so everyone was like, who was the 1-2 punch? Did the Lakers make the right decision by keeping Kobe? Yeah. Kevin Garnett makes the call. Kobe doesn't call him back all summer. So Kevin Garnett ends up leaving and going to, and I don't want to tell the story wrong, but it wasn't Boston. Or maybe it was Boston. He ended up leaving and linking up elsewhere. But all I know is that Kobe never called him back. And so I asked my friend who hosts a podcast, well, why not? He goes, because Kobe wanted to do it by himself. He didn't want to say he had any help. His mindset was that I have to tell everyone I did it. And I thought to myself, wow, that's amazing. But that's the heart of someone who wants to be excellent and great. So when I interview these people, you sense it. They just do things differently. They move differently. They have routines that are different. They're OCD in a different way. They're very superstitious. They have something that just sets them apart from everyone else. And on the outside looking in, we might think it's crazy, but
Yeah.
it's a method to the madness, if you ask me, and I respect it. And I no longer criticize it or criticize those who are great at what they do. When I hear things about them, I just understand that they have to have a certain way of moving and working and playing in order for them to achieve what they ultimately want to do. And that's always, at the end of the day, win a chip.
Wow. Yeah. So my last question for you is, what advice do you have for girls that might be looking to pursue broadcasting as a career?
Oh, that's a great question. The advice that I have for any young lady that wants to do what I do is to not necessarily focus on being at a certain place, whether that be ESPN or CNN or I don't know, I can't think of another, CBS,
Yeah.
Bleacher Report, TNT. My advice is always to be dedicated to the craft of telling true stories and being an excellent journalist. Because what I've learned is that if I stay true to the core values of journalism, and that is speaking the truth, being honest with who I am talking to, being as transparent as I possibly can be, and being dedicated to give people a voice who don't have a voice. Those are my tenements. Those are the things that I live by as a journalist.
Yeah.
I then realized that the job, the money, the success will come eventually. I don't look to be there per se or whatever specific place. I look to actually tell a great story and do a great job. Because believe it or not, it's hard to find excellence. It's hard to find people who are dedicated to their craft and not caught up with the fame of it all, or interviewing athletes, or being powerful, or getting Instagram followers. I can't even think of all the things that are so popular and needed right now. But if you're dedicated to what you really want to do, all that will come. It just takes time. And so I always tell people, make sure that you always have an allegiance to the craft of journalism, not to a place, not to a person, not to a thing. And that way you're powerful and you keep your peace. You're not chasing a thing. You're not chasing an idea. You're just chasing a story because you really want to tell a good story. You know what I mean? And that's
Yeah.
so powerful.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate your time.
Of course, you have been a pleasure, and I am by far so impressed, and I will definitely look out for your trajectory. And if you need me anytime, please reach out to me. I wish you nothing but success. I really do.